For the majority of the time that I was an active inmate, meaning that I was involved in the gangs, insofar as I ever was, at High Desert State Prison, I had the same building that I was at. My address looked the same. It was HDSP, that means High Desert State Prison, B3, meaning that I'm on B Yard, in 3 building. This designation is really important. What yard and building you're on is just a letter and a number. But prisons have neighborhoods, and there's a world of difference between one yard and another. I said I was at High Desert, and that's a serious rockin' and rollin' pen, and it's true, but I was on a soft yard there. B Yard was a good place to land if you had to go there, and 3 Block was a laid back building on that yard. So whenever they moved me to 4 Block, just at random, hey channel, pack your stuff, you have to move to 4 Block because we're kicking some guys out of the shoe and they got to go somewhere, so they're going to your cell. Well, I was disappointed. But it was going to be okay. Hell, I knew the officers. I was the clerk back in program. They'd get me moved back to 3 Block. I just had to, be cool about it. So I went to the new building, and it looked like it was going to be an okay place to land for a little while, but I didn't get to look around much. I'd only been there for like 2 hours, maybe an hour and a half, whenever a riot kicked off. And so we're on lockdown now. There's no way I'm getting moved back to where I know everybody. I'd better settle in, get to know my cellie, and get comfortable until the investigation's over. It could be weeks, months. I got lucky. The dude that I ended up living with was named Iguana, and he was a cool cat. The thing was that he had a knack for getting under officers' skin. Anytime he went out of the cell, it was just a guarantee that he was going to end up in an argument with an officer. Heck, if somebody came to the door, he's going to end up in an argument. We were on lockdown, and I had spent more time mitigating this dude being in arguments with the officers, even though he couldn't get out of his cell. You see, part of the issue was that he had a communication impairment. He was both speech and hearing impaired. He could hear some, and he could speak a bit, but you had to take your time with him. You had to look him right in the eyes, and you had to let him see your lips, and you had to speak slowly and clearly. Similarly, if he got excited, worked up, and was upset, he might speak more quickly and louder than he meant to, and it could be hard to understand what he meant. There was one officer in the building, and he just always had a problem with Officer Gowan. I don't know what it was, but this dude couldn't quit butting heads, and they had the type of interaction where neither was going to back down, and the officer isn't going to be the one who backs down. Gowan wasn't dirty as such. I don't mean he was smuggling drugs into the institution, but he was known, like people would say, Gowan's on. Not Officer Gowan is working, but Gowan's on. And that way you knew he was going to be hitting a cell. He was going to be causing some kind of trouble. He was doing his job, I suppose, but every building has that one officer that does his job a little extra, and, well, it was absolutely Officer Gowan. One day, Iguana leaps down from his bunk and goes running over to the door yelling something, and I can't make out what he's yelling. He gets to the door and rips a thing of kicker out of the sleeve of his jacket. Kicker is essentially fermented fruit mash. It's not pruno, but you need it to make pruno. It's fermenting, and it's a thick, juicy, nasty stuff that you're going to put into your sugar water, your juice, in order to make wine. He had this fermenting on the inside of his jacket. This is way his business, and there's no room for complaint on my part. It's not even like it was under the bed in a common area. It's in his jacket. And he's yelling and running to it, and he throws it into the toilet and flushes it. This is a thing of kicker. Now, a prison toilet is a wonder to behold. They are beautiful things. It's 3.5 gallon flush. It's a hard push, and it goes whoosh anytime you flush it. You can flush a sheet down a prison toilet. I don't mean this euphemistically or metaphorically. I mean, I flushed a sheet down a prison toilet. It just goes right down. All you got to do is make sure you're holding the end and letting it thread so that it doesn't get bunched up. And this is what Lizard is doing with this bag full of kicker. As he's doing it, I guess there was an air bubble in the bag because it was a big bag, or possibly there was a jam of pruno that got caught. Suddenly, the water is flooding up out of the toilet. It's not stopping. I leap down and I'm trying to pick my books and my paperwork up off the floor next to the bed where I have it. And I'm yelling at him, dude, you're flooding the deer. We got to do something. Because the toilet isn't stopping and it's jammed. So now it really looks like we're flooding the tier, which is something that inmates do whenever they want to express a displeasure. They'll clog the toilet and just flush it again and again and again until there's toilet water running all down the tier. It's a unsanitary and vocal way of expressing your disapproval of a situation without going so far as committing violence. Just as I'm wrapping my head around the fact that the cops are going to come up and think we're flooding the tier, Officer Gowan and his partner open up the door to the room and start yelling, out, out, out. This is definitely against the rules. We're on lockdown. They should have come up to the door and put us in handcuffs, taken their time, made sure we weren't armed, anything like that. They don't care. They want us out of the cell right then because they think we're flooding the tier. Just as I think the conversation is about to get, pretty angry about what's wrong with you guys, you're flooding the tier, and, maybe the gloves are even going to come out, as it were, they realize that this is through no fault of Iguana and myself, at least purportedly. There's no evidence that we've done anything wrong. The toilet's malfunctioning. Gosh, bummer. There's no point in beating us over it. We're not doing it on purpose. As it turned out, the reason they had been coming up was because Officer Gowan's partner had smelt the fermented mash. He'd smelt pruno, put his mouth and his nose up to the door. Iguana had noticed and had waited until the guy had turned his back and jumped down to try and get stuff thrown away, but hadn't quite been quick enough. Still, they can't prove anything. The evidence is gone. So they take us down on the tier and they spend about an hour searching our cell. Now, credit to Officer Gowan, and I did not particularly like the gentleman. I thought that at best he was a petty and irresponsible sadist who shouldn't be in charge of men in any context. But he had the opportunity to throw my letters and paperwork and everything down into that nasty toilet water. He could have thrown Iguana's stuff down there too. I mean, it's within the purview of his job. He's just searching the cell. It's not his fault that the toilet has flooded the tier. He went into the chase right after they got us out of the cell and turned off the water because the noise was so bad, the whoosh, and it was still flooding everywhere. Finally, they put us back in the cell. I appreciated that my stuff hadn't ended up on the floor, but Iguana, he had a problem with authority, and I get it. The dude got dealt some rough cards in a bunch of ways. He's a good dude, but he was angry. And this was an occasion for him to vent that anger. He went up to that door and started yelling at him, you shouldn't be picking on me, basically. I don't know why you came up and searched my cell. That's right, you ain't going to find nothing here. Well, Gowan didn't want to hear it, I guess, because whenever it was time for him to turn the water back on in our cell, he didn't. He just walked off. And then whenever they came by and passed out mail, an hour later, up on the door, hey, boss, you didn't turn our water back on. And he's smug. Says, yeah, it ain't getting turned back on today. Walks on. Well, that's a bummer, but, Iguana and I know how to abide and we know how to do time. Yeah, you can get by without running water, absolutely. And we're waiting. Sure enough, whenever that shift ends and the next guy comes on, we're at the door, hey, boss, get our water turned back on. You're going to have to talk to Gowan about that. He talked to me on the way out of the building today. Oh, man. So now it's 2 full shifts we haven't gotten water. It's 16 hours. It's starting to feel like a lot whenever, who walks in that next morning, 2 in the morning or something like that, whenever they're changing out their shifts? Oh, Officer Gowan. He's doing a double that day, so we get him in the morning and the afternoon. Lucky us. It was 36 hours without running water, and I don't mean to gripe, but what the hell's wrong with a man? he'd do something like that. We survived. I mean, it's not even the end of the world. Our neighbors, we figured out how to thread a plastic bag, and they legit sent us over drinking water. Not like we're gonna die, it just stunk. Finally, we talked to the officer whenever Gowan leaves, 36 hours after he started. Oh, your water's out. No problem. Let me turn it on. Yeah, I heard there was a thing. Gowan's talking to me, but I don't give a crap, man. Here, let me get your water. Because not everybody has this attitude. Gowan has a limited number of officers that are just going to leave the water turned off. That can come back on somebody in weird ways, unexpected ways. He goes and turns on our water, and immediately I'm so relieved to hear the whoosh. It just keeps flushing. Whatever was wrong with the toilet that made it keep flushing whenever it was flooding the tier, the clog's gone, but the toilet won't stop. And I'm on the door telling the officer, hey, wait, boss. Oh, no, he has no more favors for me and Iguana. He turned our water back on. That's all we had coming. So, work order, complain, and eventually, 3 days, they turn on the water. They turn on the water and off the water and on again, and whatever the heck was going wrong, it's fixed. I got to give credit to Iguana here because his attitude was, why do we want this fixed? It's awesome. That 3.5 gallons of flush is so much easier for throwing trash away, or, if you forget to press the button, it's going to take care of it for you. The volume didn't bother the dude because he was very hard of hearing. But I expressed to him that it was miserable for me. It was like a power tool operating at the edge of your bed. Just a little one like a drill, but all day. And he was on that door right up with me, complaining every day, even though it didn't bother him none. He was a solid dude. It's the thing about running water that I really like to remind myself whenever I'm blessed to get a hot shower or pour myself a cup of coffee. It's easy to take it for granted, and then there comes a day when you don't have it. And it's the end of the world, even though you didn't think about it when you had it. That's right up my wheelhouse. It's the type of thing I like to focus on, these things that you assume that there's always going to be more of it until it's gone. I had an acquaintance while I was incarcerated, a Russian Jew. Vlad, I guess. Vlad, I did not know very well. I only spoken to him a couple dozen times at the most. But he had a big personality. He'd been locked up a while. His story was that 20 years ago or something like that, he'd been in Russia and he'd been doing gang stuff there. And that he did well enough and saved up money and talked to his people, and he was coming to the U.S. to do stuff here. And he hit his new territory and decided he was going to make a point and people would know his name, same as back in Russia, but he underestimated the level of response whenever bodies start hitting the floor, and he ended up going to prison, and that's just where he was going to stay. He'd only been in California for 3 or 4 days, he said. Still, he'd laugh whenever anybody complained. He'd say, do you know that in my country, I was doing big things. I had drugs, women, money, whatever you wanted. We had hot water most of the time. I could get hot water most of the time in Russia. And here in California, I hear people cry whenever they turn off the showers for a couple of days, or they turn off your water. Make do. You'll be all right. He had no sympathy for whining. I think he liked being able to, you're weak. You don't know what it is. And to be fair, he's a hard man. I suppose he earned the right to say you're weak. Whenever you find yourself with the opportunity to appreciate something simple like hot running water, don't shirk that opportunity. Really take that moment. Because it's like time. You always think you have it, and then suddenly you realize it's gone. Don't waste it. Thank you for listening today.